Private History of the Jumping Frog, story by Mark Twain. 5 or 6 years ago, a lady from Finland asked me to tell her a story in our Negro dialect so that she could get an idea of what that variety of speech was like. I told her one of Hopkinson Smith's Negro stories and gave her a copy of Harper's Monthly containing it. She translated it for a Swedish newspaper, but by an oversight named me as the author of it instead of Smith. I was very sorry for that, because I got a good lashing in the Swedish press, which would have fallen to his share but for that mistake. For it was shown that Boccaccio had told that very story in his curt and meager fashion 500 years before Smith took hold of it and made a good and tellable thing out of it. Chapter 1. Have always been sorry for Smith, but my own turn has come now. A few weeks ago, Professor Van Dyke of Princeton asked this question. Do you know how old your Jumping Frog story is? And I answered, yes, 45 years. The thing happened in Calaveras County in the spring of 1849. No, it happened earlier, a couple of thousand years earlier. It is a Greek story. Chapter 1. Was astonished and hurt, I said. I am willing to be a literary thief if it has been so ordained. I am even willing to be caught robbing the ancient dead alongside of Hopkinson Smith, for he is my friend and a good fellow, and I think would be as honest as anyone if he could do it without occasioning remark. But I am not willing to antedate his crimes by 1500 years. I must ask you to knock off part of that. But the professor was not chaffing. He was in earnest and could not abate a century. He offered to get the book and send it to me and the Cambridge textbook containing the English translation also. I thought I would like the translation best, because Greek makes me tired. January 30th, he sent me the English version, and I will presently insert it in this article. It is my Jumping Frog tale in every essential. It is not strung out as I have strung it out, but it is all there. To me, this is very curious and interesting. Curious for several reasons. For instance, Chapter 1. Heard the story told by a man who was not telling it to his hearers as a thing new to them, but as a thing which they had witnessed and would remember. He was a dull person and ignorant. He had no gift as a storyteller and no invention. In his mouth, this episode was merely history and statistics, and the gravest sort of history, too. He was entirely serious, for he was dealing with what to him were austere facts, and they interested him solely because they were facts. He was drawing on his memory, not his mind. He saw no humor in his tale, neither did his listeners. Neither he nor they ever smiled or laughed. In my time, I have not attended a more solemn conference. To him and to his fellow gold miners, there were just two things in the story that were worth considering. One was the smartness of its hero, Jim Smiley, in taking the stranger in with a loaded frog, and the other was Smiley's deep knowledge of a frog's nature, for he knew, as the narrator asserted and the listeners conceded, that a frog likes shot and is always ready to eat it. Those men discussed those 2 points, and those only. They were hearty in their admiration of them, and none of the party was aware that a first-rate story had been told in a first-rate way, and that it was brimful of a quality whose presence they never suspected, humor. Now then, the interesting question is, did the frog episode happen in Angel's Camp in the spring of '49, as told in my hearing that day in the fall of 1865? I am perfectly sure that it did. I am also sure that its duplicate happened in Boeotia a couple of thousand years ago. I think it must be a case of history actually repeating itself, and not a case of a good story floating down the ages and surviving because too good to be allowed to perish. Chapter 1. Would now like to have the reader examine the Greek story and the story told by the dull and solemn Californian, and observe how exactly alike they are in essentials.